welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessikah. I will be hosting you today, and I am here with the author of this wild book. Please, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us about this book, and we can just chat from there, because I could not even, if I could try to put this in a category, it would be the category of awesome. And that would pretty much be where we go.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. So I'm Nancy Stohlman, and the book that Jessikah is referring to is my new book called After the Rapture. And yeah, it is a wild book, actually. I call it a flash novel. Some people might call it a novella. It's a book that's very compressed. So it's got the scope of a novel, but it's in very compressed flash fiction type chapters. But the premise is really, and it's a book that I started writing back in 2015. So I've been writing it forever.
I was about to say, I mean, so I knew that because I was reading about that earlier. And I like 2015, everything just started kind of spiraling. And I'm sure there have been other times in history where it felt like everything was spiraling. But man, what a time to begin a book about the Rapture.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
It's funny because, well, it's not funny, but yeah, so 2015, we were in the middle of like shootings constantly. I think Sandy Hook had just started when I really wrote the first piece of this book, which is called The Bad Thing. And it was sort of like I was finding myself, as so many others, just sort of frustrated at that spiral. It was like everything seemed to be getting worse all the time, and everybody felt so helpless about what to do about it. What can we do? We can thoughts and prayers all day long, but what can we really do? And so many people were trying to express their feelings about the situation, and I'm a writer, I'm a absurdist, I'm a surrealist. I think humor is absolutely undervalued when it comes to how we can say things that we can't actually say, right? It's like the court jester was always the one that could tell the king the things that nobody else could tell the king, right? And so I just realized the only way that I can express what I need to say about this imploding world is through humor. And so I just started envisioning, well, what would happen if this got worse? What would happen if this got worse? What would happen if this got worse? Okay, now we're all waiting for the rapture. What happens if the rapture doesn't even come? What happens that, and it was a constant, how can I stay 5 steps ahead of the actual ridiculousness happening in the world?
It's funny you say that because I mean, it's not the same. And I want to get into some of the stuff in this book because, man, it's really great. But when you were just saying that, it made me think of there was these Netflix movies. The first one was Death to 2020, I think, which happened after 2020. It was right 2021. And it was just this documentary that touched, to me, it almost touched on horror. And it just kind of went by the whole last year and all the crazy stuff that happened. And it wasn't even that distorted. It was just, hey, this is crazy. And then 2021 wasn't much better. And then there was Death to 2021. And I was like, oh my God, are we ever going to stop spiraling? And I got that when I started reading your book about you talk about once a year everybody should wear a specific color to prevent bad things from happening, but then there was another color and another day, and it's it does kind of feel like, and I'm not immune from wearing colors to acknowledge certain things, but it's sort of like these things become very commercialized and you forget the reason why you're wearing the color. It almost, I don't know if you're familiar with the musician, the songwriter Ani DeFranco,
Oh,
but
yes.
yeah, she has that one song called Fuel from Little Plastic Castle, which is like one of my favorite songs of all time. But there's a line from it, something like, we can choose between the colors of the lipstick on the horse because we know the difference of the font of 20% more. And it just kind of made me feel that whole, like, like everything is cross marketing. That's a line that from it. You're like, okay, we're going to acknowledge this bad thing and we're going to wear this color to remind people that this bad thing shouldn't happen. Oh, it just happened again. And then a worse thing happened. Let's pick another color. And you really capture that. And I know this sounds very depressing, but this novel is actually very funny. Um, you did mention Flash. Could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so flash fictions are stories that are under 1,000 words, typically, but they're stories. They're telling a story, so it's not just like a sketch or whatever. And so I've been working in like the house of flash fiction for a long time, about 15 or more years. I wrote a book called Going Short, which is about the craft of writing flash fiction, and so I love, the challenge of taking an idea, a story, and distilling it into its like most poignant essence. But also, I was raised on novels. I love a novel. I read novels before I go to bed. And so for me, it's like this book and everything that I've been kind of working towards is like, what would happen at the juncture of like these distilled flash fictions and the epic novel story that covers, a larger territory. So for me, that is my sweet spot. And this book really showcases that because it tells like a big story, but it tells it in these like mosaic, almost distilled little nuggets. So it's fast, you can read it quickly, but then you realize you've covered a huge territory.
Yeah, I really just love the format, and it's good, I think, for people who, I don't want to say they're impatient, but I think that the way that the last few years have played out has kind of taken a toll on our ability to focus. And it gets the point across in really good ways. The flow is beautiful. It's very snappy. It gives you a lot to think about. And like just these, like you said, like these little nuggets, that really just hit the point hard, but in just a really fun way without it being terribly depressing. Another thing I also kind of wanted to ask about was, because I don't want to, I mean, there's so many concepts that come up in it, but talk about, you talk about DNA kits. And there's this whole thing about like, what dictator are you related to? And I just could not stop laughing when I just read the title of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about just where that all came from? Because DNA
Yeah.
have really become a huge thing recently.
Absolutely, and I think that story and so many others, especially towards the beginning of the book when I'm just kind of in pure ridiculous, it all stems from reality, like you can look up any ridiculous headline and then just ask yourself, what would 5 steps more ridiculous than this be, and so how many times are we taking, wasting our time, literally wasting our time, taking Facebook quizzes on, what celebrity are we, whatever. And also, sending off our DNA to like who knows where to do who knows what with. So like, what if we put these two things together? And what if we're like, what if it's down to like, I couldn't resist the like, which dictator are you related to? Is it Stalin? Is it Hitler? Okay, I'm gonna put my DNA in the box. I'm gonna find
Everybody
out.
wants Stalin, right? Is that what it was? Everybody wanted to be related to
But
Stalin.
that's mathematically impossible. So, our narrator got Franco or whatever. But yeah, just this sort of like, I think what I loved about writing so many of these pieces is that like kind of like the humor of desperation. You know what I mean? It's not a depressing desperation. It's like how ridiculous are we, and how desperate are we looking for meaning, and I think that that's the bottom line of the characters in this book, and I think, us really, is that like all these things that we may find ridiculous is really being prompted by like a desire for meaning, a desire for connection. We want to feel like we mean more than it seems like we mean. We want our color to mean something, not just that we paid $20 to wear this color. And even in the book, the rapture, as soon as the rapture is coming, then the rapture is commercialized, like prepare for the rapture with Pepsi, and everybody's got to go to the certain place. And so how do we find, in a world that's more and more commercialized, more and more consumer driven, more and more crowded, we're 8 billion and counting on the planet, how do we carve out niches that feel genuine and authentic in our experiences? I think that's the bottom line challenge for all of us.
Sure. And I have to ask, you talk about something like the best place to see the rapture is a place called Beatrice. Is that like a reference to Dante's Inferno?
No, it's not actually. It's a
Oh,
real
what?
city. It's a
I
real
was
city.
thinking I picked up on something and I was so clever. Ugh.
And this is amazing. I love that you shared that though, because I really think that a good work of art has a conversation well beyond what the writer intended. So if you picked that up and someone else picked that up and that becomes a whole thing that I didn't intend, like bonus, like the text is always smarter than we are. The book is always, arriving with its own blueprint and its own DNA. So I think the writer, the artist, the painter, whoever, our job is to kind of midwife this into existence and not claim any of the genius of it.
So, you know, okay, this is kind of like an offhand question. There have been so many quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here because we're not using video. So I'm going to say air quote predictions of the rapture. And most recently, the one that stuck in my mind, I think it was like, was it 2012 or something? There were billboards all over the place. Where did this whole idea of, doing this book and like talking about like specifically the rapture come from?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because the original idea for the Rapture came, I want to say in 2017. I'll have to double check the date, but it was when there was a solar eclipse coming in, and the line of totality was going to be coming where I live or close to where I live. I live in Denver, and the line of totality was going to be crossing through Wyoming and all these places. And I was just watching people like go into this frenzy, add it to the list of other things we were in a frenzy about. But we had to get the solar glasses and we had to make sure we were in the right spot for the totality, and we had to do this. And people were just like weeks ahead of time, like booking out, all of Yellowstone because Yellowstone was going to be in the totality, and just, it had that desperation of like, if I don't see this eclipse the correct way, then my life is over, right? I have to do this correctly. And I think so much of our existence is that like I've got to do it correctly. I've got to eat the right thing and take the right vitamin and do the right, Pilates program, and I have to like raise my children in this certain way, or I don't count, or I disappear somehow, And so this kind of herd mentality, oh, okay, well, we're all going to do this, we're all going to do that. I just saw it almost comically happening in Wyoming, of all places, as people were preparing for this solar eclipse. So that was really where the idea for the rapture came for me.
Yeah, because automatically, and first of all, I have to say, like, not everybody really knows what the rapture is. I had to actually explain it to family members. I was raised and brought up in a Jewish family, and they had no idea. So, like, we're driving up to, I think it was my brother's college graduation. We're driving up to Massachusetts, and there are these billboards freaking everywhere. And I think again, I can't remember if this was 2012. It was a while ago. And there are these billboards everywhere about the end, the end of the world, blah blah blah. And I come back to work, and my coworkers are saying, "Oh my God, their kids are hearing about this thing," and I'm like, and my parents are like, "Have you seen these billboards?" I'm like, "Okay, do you know what that actually means?" and they're just like the end of the world. I'm like, but specifically the rapture, like, do you know what that would entail? And then they're just like, no, actually, which is interesting to explain to people anyway. But I did happen to be in Manhattan around Bryant Park at the date and the time that this was all supposed to go down. And it was the most surreal experience because everybody started going woohoo and high-fiving and being like, we survived the rapture. And it was the most insanely beautiful experience.
And I remember the 2012, that was the Mayan calendar one. I remember the year 2000 and the Y2K and like
Oh,
all of
me
our
too.
technology, you know, was gonna
Totally.
go down.
I remember being like at a bar and like my friend and I was sleeping over her house and I'm like, all right, this is gonna be it. And
Yep.
I woke up the next day and everything was fine.
And here we were. Yeah,
Here we were.
I filled up my bathtub with water like they said to do, you know, and then the next morning I drained that water. But and in the book too, it's that same sort of thing where we're like all hyped up for the rapture, and then the rapture's a dud, you know, and then it's like, well, now what do we do? Like, you know, and so there's
Rude.
looking, right, like what now can we look forward to? Oh, well, now the Antichrist is
The
coming.
fall
Okay.
orgy.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So
Right.
so it's like this sort of like build up our adrenaline waiting for something that doesn't happen over and over and over, and how desperate we become to make something happen, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was just captured really, really well. So before we close out, because I do think people want, like, there's just, like I said, like, there's so much. And I think this is just a really fun book about doom and humanity and how humanity is bringing about doom. But it's funny. It's super funny. Um, do you have any favorite fictional apocalypse books or stories that you just really enjoy?
Yeah, yeah. And they're not necessarily funny. But I would say
That's
that
okay.
yeah, I reread 1984 every couple of years. I think that's an amazing book. It holds up. It terrifies me every time I read it. I love The Handmaid's Tale. And, you know, I loved that book. I've loved that book for 20 years. I was really reluctant to watch the Netflix or the Hulu series because I didn't want them to ruin it for me. And they didn't ruin it for me. It was amazing. I loved it. Um, I love a book called Blindness by Jose Saramago. I believe he's Brazilian, I want to say. It's a terrifying book, horrifying, but another one that just really left me kind of shaken in a good way. Um, I loved Station 11 too, which I read not too long ago. And then, of course, you know, I love The Stand, and I read The Stand pretty close uh, before the actual pandemic hit. And that whole first section of like Captain Trips and everybody, you know, I was like, wow, Stephen
Yeah,
King really channeling.
weren't people like sharing passages from
Yeah,
that at some
yep,
point, and they're just
yep,
like, Stephen King predicted this, and then it's like,
yeah,
yeah, no, he really didn't. It's
no,
just you just things are cyclical, and you
yep.
just have to pay attention to nuance.
Yeah, and I think, you know, especially artistic people, we just kind of stick our goo, you like stick our antenna into the goo, you know, and the goo is saying all sorts of things, you know. So if you're paying attention, you pick up on things, you know, that are there for the taking. It's not, you know, that any one of us is Nostradamus or anything like that. But you just kind of pick up on if this trajectory continues, like this is where we could end up, you know, and then sometimes you do end up there.
I mean, was Nostradamus even Nostradamus?
Yeah,
That's
right,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
because when you look at that, I mean, that was another one. What was it? There was another, God, was it 1997? There was some other apocalypse like prediction. Oh, right, when people were talking about the towers and they're just like Nostradamus predicted this, and then it's like, well, did he, or is this just super, super vague?
Right.
And I mean, it's interesting because in general, we want to believe, a lot of us, in seers, and we want to believe that there are people who have that foresight and, mystical powers. But then there's also cold reading, like when you go to somebody, like, I'm not going to say his name, but it rhymes with Sman Medwords. I mean, there is some reading that
Yeah.
takes place when you talk to somebody and you say that their dead loved one is chatting with them. Now, I'm not going to say that this person or any of these people are necessarily frauds. Although I did go to somebody who supposedly did the same thing, and like at one point they said something and it had no connection to me. I just thought it was interesting and my eyebrows went up and they're like, it's you. And I'm like, it's definitely not. And they're like, no, it totally is. And they're trying to fit it in. And I'm like, no, I promise you, this has nothing to do with me. But there is, like people either intuitively or by practice or by trade or anything are really just kind of keyed into things that are going on around them and the reactions of people.
Well, and I think that we're storytellers too. We're all storytellers, whether you're right or not. We're all storytellers. So we're all taking, if I put 5 random objects in front of you, your brain is going to want to make a story about why those objects are together. So I think we just kind of, we pick up on pieces and we make stories. And I think that people who are in that kind of seeing field, that's what they're doing, is that they're intuiting these pieces and putting them together and creating a story that may or may not resonate with the person. I thought of another.
Sometimes that's very helpful and therapeutic, and sometimes it really helps people put things to rest. And I'm not necessarily, like I said, like I consider myself an open-minded skeptic, maybe, but I mean, if people, like, the minute people are taken advantage of, that's kind of when I'm like, out.
Sure,
right?
Yeah. No, but I think that artists do basically the same thing, that we tell stories with the pieces that we find, because every one of us finds 5 different pieces just in the way that we are oriented in the world. I'm going to see this and you're going to see this, even though we're both looking at the same thing, So I think what we get to do as an artist is we get to hold up a window, like, this is how I see it. Like, this is my view, and this is the story that I'm telling about that view. Come take a look through my window. Like, isn't that cool? Isn't that interesting? So yeah. Oh, I was thinking, I thought of one more book that I love, apocalyptic book. It's Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro.
Oh my God, I love that book. Oh, yes. That book, I think about that book a lot.
Yeah.
And you do mention clones, by the way, in this.
I do, yeah. Just briefly. Yeah.
Just very, very briefly, but it was great. It was just like perfect. No, that is a really good one. Well, anyway, I want to say thank you so much. Are you working on something else forthcoming?
I am definitely like in the deep mud of the new project, so I can't say that it's forthcoming necessarily. It's forthcoming in the future iteration, but I'm very much like in the process of discovery and digging and like all muddy with it, and it's kind of the best part. It's like falling in love with the project. So right now it relies a lot on Greek mythology and the Midwest, and like Gothic, Midwestern Gothic, and tarot cards. So the 3 of those things somehow are converging.
Oh my God. Can I just
crazy
read that now? I love every single thing about that is totally my jam. I love Greek mythology. I love Gothic. And I have a real affinity for the imagery on tarot cards. Again, that's like one of those things that, like, to me, it's like whether or not you believe in it, the imagery is really beautiful. And I just love all the artwork and just, I mean, it's just like iconic. So yeah, I can't wait to read that one whenever it comes out.
I'm enjoying it so much. I'm like madly in love with it, and we're like off on our own adventures. So it will come to fruition when it comes to fruition, hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'm excited. It's always good to be working on a project. It's always the worst when you're in between projects.
Are you a fan of tarot cards?
I am, yeah, I am. And what I've been doing with this project is like, it's almost like I'm inventing my own set of cards that are not necessarily tarot cards at all. It's like I'm writing a book, like I'm writing the instruction book to a set of cards that don't exist. Yeah, they're all like Midwestern themed.
Yes,
So
they don't exist
wild.
yet. There is
They don't exist
literally,
yet.
first of all, I have to ask, do you have a favorite set, art set?
I do. It's called the Cosmic Tribe Tarot, and they're just wild. Most of the figures in the cards are naked, and it's very like Mardi Gras looking. Everybody's kind of wild. The artwork is just lovely. Stephen Posty, I want to say is his name, that does the artwork. My very favorite. Yeah.
I have there's a place near me that I've gone several times, and they have just a whole room full of tarot cards that they sell. And my friend got Star Trek tarot, which is very funny. But I'm an Art Nouveau person, and there's an Art Nouveau tarot which is really lovely, and then there's also a cat one which is really pretty, and then of course like the Rider deck is classic. You can't
Classic, yeah.
you can't divorce tarot from that specific deck.
No, for sure, for sure. And yeah, so it's like I think that we're all, and it's coming up a lot more, or maybe it's just coming up in my world because I'm seeing it. You buy a Honda and then you see Hondas, but I feel like people are becoming interested in kind of the archetypes of this tarot deck, and what's going on here, and why are we attracted to these archetypes, and that we that they're just sort of like puzzle pieces that we can rearrange. And so yeah, I find it fascinating what people are doing with kind of writing and divination.
Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. When does this book come out? Is it
The
out?
book, it is, I believe the pre-sale orders are being mailed now. So
Okay.
I think the official release date is March 7th,
Cool.
but I definitely think you can get in there and like order a pre-sale and get it mailed to you soon. I actually sold a bunch of books at an event last night, kind of a pre-soft release. So it's kind of like happening as we speak. So,
Well, by the time this airs, it'll be out. Please go out and read it. It is super, super fun. Thank you so much, Nancy Stohlman.
thank you.
Check out After the Rapture, and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.